Hello, Year 5. This is your curriculum lesson, the first one for this week. It's all about a timeline to do with space travel. So my first question during your starter is, I want you to think about why do they travel to space? You've learned quite a lot in previous years, probably about Neil Armstrong and going to the moon, people going into space and doing other things while they're there. We've recently looked at Tim Peake and Helen Sharman, haven't we? So we know that they went there, but I want you to think about why. Why is there such an emphasis on humans to go to space? Have a think about that. Pause the video here, have a couple of minutes just to think about it. See if you can jot some ideas down in one of the pages in your curriculum books maybe that you've just been given. And we'll continue from there. So I'll give you a couple of seconds just to pause the video and then I'll carry on. Right. So, through sending people and different pieces of technology to space, not sure about that. That's not very good spelling, is it? We have gained a better understanding of space. So, today we'll be going over a timeline of space travel from 1940 to the present day. So, the first thing that started happening was in a decade, the 1940s, which is about... trying to work that out now. It is about 80 years ago now. Is that right? Yeah, that should be right. So, we're going to think about where we started from. Obviously, the technology isn't going to be as good as it was today. They didn't even have so much as proper computers then, never mind the computers that we use today. So, we're thinking about how it started in the 1940s and all the things that are happening up today. I don't know if you've noticed about this, but a couple of days ago, or seen in the news or anything, a new rover landed on Mars. A new Mars rover landed and started taking pictures of the planet. For some reason, I couldn't find any of the pictures or couldn't get them onto this flip chart, but there's some brilliant pictures. I'm sure if you just give a quick Google search of pictures on Mars, you'll be able to see them. They were literally taken a couple of days ago in a video. There's a video on there of what it looks like on Mars, which is quite amazing to look at. So, space travel has helped us to understand where humans began, or this timeline rather will help us to understand where humans began with space travel and how science has improved over time so that humans can become even more knowledgeable about everything that goes on in space. So being able to understand our universe, our planet, and the other solar systems further away, we've been able to understand a lot more about those, haven't we? So we'll make a start. Oops, it's a bit far. So in the 1940s, so we'll start from 1947. The first animals were sent to space. Fruit flies were used to see how they would react to the environment of space. The flies went to space with some corn for food. So we sent some small flies into space just to see how living animals would survive in space. Just to try and think about how we could get humans up there, how we'd be able to, how we'd sort of be able to live up there. So if flies can live up there, can we think about a different animal? So, as we can see here, in 1949, the first monkey was sent to space. His name was Albert II, and he was a rhesus monkey. He set off on the 14th of June in an American rocket and flew 83 miles away from Earth. I think I'm right in saying he survived. So again, we went from flies, then put a slightly bigger animal. A monkey is obviously quite similar to humans, isn't it? So we saw how that lived in space, and how that reacted. So we'll move on. So after that, it went to 1957, and Laika, a Russian dog, was the first animal to orbit the Earth. She travelled in a spacecraft called Sputnik 2, and her name means barker in Russian, so like dogs bark, isn't she? She was sent to see whether survival by humans in space was possible. So they were starting to get ideas to see if we could survive up there. Bit harsh to send a dog, but again, that's what they had to do. And again, I don't know if we do something similar now. That's obviously a long time ago, isn't it? 1957. So, then later that year, Russia launched Sputnik, which is the first satellite in space, the first man-made thing to orbit the Earth. So Sputnik just means satellite in Russian. And on this day, the space age had become, because we were trying to get more things into space, trying to see how they reacted to the environment of space, trying to see how they moved around the Earth. So in 1959, 2 years later, Russian and American scientists were in a competition to send a spacecraft to the moon. This is sometimes called the space race. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but Russia succeeded first when a space probe called Luna 2 was sent, and it travelled at such an immense speed that if any person was inside it, they would have died, unfortunately. So that was the first probe, the first technology to go to the space. So in 1961, 2 years later, Yuri Gagarin from Russia as well became the first man in space. His spacecraft, called the Vostok 1, completed one orbit of the Earth in 2 hours, and he had to land by parachute as the craft was designed to crash land. Then, 2 years later, Russian cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova is the first woman in space, and a crater on the far side of the moon is named after her. So there you go. They're naming people after, naming things on different planets after people have been to space. 3 years later, in 1966, a robot spaceship was sent to the moon on the 30th of May by NASA to ensure a safe landing. So, the robot was called Surveyor 1, and it took photographs of the moon's surface. And the first photos of the moon on the surface were shown here. So, where am I looking here? And sent back to the photographs sent back to excited scientists on Earth, and the information was used to figure out if a safe landing was possible. Then, the one that I'm sure you all know about, 3 years later, on the 20th of July 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first people to ever walk on the moon. Their spaceship, Apollo 11, flew them 250,000 miles, and the first words said on the moon were, "The Eagle has landed," on about their spaceship, Apollo 11. So, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. He was the first man to go out of the Earth's atmosphere and into space, but Neil Armstrong was the first one to go onto the moon. So in the 60s, it was the most progress made, wasn't there, in space, and the biggest achievement, getting a man onto the moon. So, 1971. From this year on, American astronauts embarked on their 5th and 6th missions to the moon, that is, and a lunar rover was used to travel on it. So, in 1973, a Russian probe was sent to explore Mars. It stayed in orbit for a year, but it was destroyed when the parachute failed to open upon landing. So they tried to get one there, nobody was on it, it was just a piece of technology. It got into Mars, the parachute failed, and it exploded, unfortunately. So, we'll move on. Then, I've included this one in, just because I wanted it to sort of show you a bit more about space travel and how far we have come. So, in 1986, in the 80s, so we're only talking about just over 30 years ago now, a terrible tragedy occurred as a rocket exploded shortly after it launching. So, a rocket containing astronauts to go to space or the moon or wherever it was going, launched, got a few feet up in the air, and then exploded, killing 7. So 7 astronauts lost their lives because of this. So it happened on January the 28th, and it reminded everyone just how dangerous space travel is and how brave astronauts are. So it's quite a good reminder, isn't it? I think, not a good reminder by any means, probably the wrong word, but it just shows you how far technology has come since then. Unfortunately, it was a huge accident and that happened, but we still have people wanting to be astronauts regardless of that, don't we? Because we want to find out more about the universe and our place in it, which is what we're trying to do this half term, obviously, without going to space ourselves. So in 1991, we've looked at this, obviously, haven't we? So Helen Sharman, who was born in 1963 in a wonderful city called Sheffield, won a competition to become the first British astronaut in space. She had to undergo 18 months of intensive training and was part of a mission on the MIR space station. So that's the MIR space station there. She was the first British astronaut, which obviously we've looked at quite a lot, haven't we? So we're into the 90s now. We're into quite recent history, but we'll move on. So in 2001, an American millionaire called Dennis Tito became the first space tourist in a Russian spacecraft. So he paid $20 billion to go to space on holiday, essentially. Shows you what's possible these days, doesn't it? So in mid-2003, the NASA Mars Exploration Rover mission was launched. This space mission involved two rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. The rovers were given the task of exploring Mars and sending any data back to Earth, which is what they're doing. Obviously, there's a new one now. I can't remember what it's called. I will find out for you. So, on 21st of June 2004, so when I was, how old would I have been? 6, the company Spaceship One launched the first ever privately funded, so not funded by a country like America through NASA or Russia, the first ever privately funded flights in space. Tickets for places on the spacecraft are available to buy now, so you can still buy them now and go to space with it. Obviously, from, as we've seen here, it's obviously cost quite a lot. So, the Rosetta Philae mission began the 2nd of March 2004, was completed late in 2014. Philae was detached from the Rosetta aircraft, where it would land successfully on the surface of a comet and transmit data back to Earth. So even, how many years ago is that? 17 years ago, we were transmitting data back to Earth, weren't we? So people were going through, we were managing to get, from going from putting them on huge planets, which are quite hard to miss, we were then putting huge pieces of technology onto comets to try and find bits about comets, which I think is amazing for how far we've come in what is really quite a short amount of time. So, then in 2015, scientists found evidence of liquid water on Mars for the first time, which was a huge find. So it furthers the possibility of there ever being able to sustain life on Mars, so maybe land humans on Mars, which is, again, crazy, isn't it? So the Rosetta mission achieved its first ever landing of a probe on a comet in deep space. So it went, the Rosetta Philae comet that we've just been talking about here, managed to find a comet further away from our solar system and land on it, and then it transmits data back to Earth so we can find out bits about the comet. So Tim Peake then became the first British ESA, European Space Agency astronaut, and the sixth British-born person to visit the International Space Station, but the first true British one. So, the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter probe takes the closest ever photographs of the Sun. The probe gets within 77 million kilometres of the surface of the Sun, which obviously is a huge, huge, huge distance, but it's the closest we've ever got, and records images of the mini solar flares on the Sun. So, you think from 1947 we were only sending fruit flies to space, and now in 2020 we're getting things really close to the Sun to understand how that goes. So you can see there how technology has improved. And you think when we're looking, maybe when we think about this in 2030, so I know it's only 9 years from now, but at the end of this decade, who knows what we will have achieved in those 9 years. It'll be very, very interesting, won't it? So, I'll leave it there because I'm running out of time on my recorder. So, I hope that you're going to find this really, really easy to do. If you do need any help at all, please get in touch with me using the Year 5 email. I'm there to answer your questions all week this week. So, see you very soon and take care.